Welcome back to Derry Public Radio. Reporting from the basement of the Derry Civic Center, this is Sam Alexander with a special editorial. I would like to announce to our fans that we have not been entirely truthful here at Derry Public Radio. Since the inception of this podcast, our co-host, Joshua Kahn, has been, in reality, a pseudonym. My pseudonym.
I'm Joshua Kahn.
And you're listening to Derry Public Radio.
This is Derry Public Radio.
Welcome back to Derry Public Radio, a bi-weekly Stephen King book club podcast. I'm one of your hosts, Joshua Kahn, alongside CM Alexander.
Hello, everyone.
And Benjamin Graham.
Hey, constant readers.
Today, we are going to wrap up the last half of the dark half. So chapter 17 through the end of the book. If you are reading along, then you've already read this. If not, major spoilers ahead for this book. Today, Ben is going to be leading our discussion. So Ben, take it away, buddy.
Excited to get into the dark half of the dark half. Some grim shit happens.
Yeah, it does.
First impressions.
It builds so well, I think. I started getting just intensely drawn in. It's like a lot of his books that once that tidal wave starts crashing, you can't put it down. And so I read all of our assigned reading in 2 days. Because I was just like, all right, I'm all in. Let's do this.
I would just like to say that hundreds of birds were hurt in the making of this book.
The finale, leading up to the finale, once Thad evades his escort, from then to the end, it just goes and goes.
Yeah, it's just wall-to-wall bonkers.
Yeah, but before we get into the second half, I wanted to talk to you guys about something. I feel like I wasn't able to articulate something I felt about the first half of the book.
Okay.
And that is what kind of book this is versus what it could have been, if that makes any sense.
I think so.
Let me explain.
Because I kind of have a thought in that same vein.
Yeah. In the first half of the book, Thad talks about how the George Stark books are inspired by these mystery novels, these crime novels. They are constant movement. The characters are more machine than man, you know. And as a stand-in for King, you would assume that King is also inspired by these books.
Right.
Why isn't that this book? Because the first half of the book, when compared to the second half, is so goddamn slow.
Yeah.
Are you saying you don't think it works, or you do think it works?
I think the ending makes up for it. The second half completely makes up for it. But reading through the first half, there are so many long sequences. It takes so long for the characters to discover what we, the readers, just know. And there could have been another book where it's like, is Thad George Stark? You don't know. Well, no. From the get-go, we know George Stark is out there murdering folks, just murking motherfuckers left and right. And I feel like King could have just committed to it and had a whole book of just Stark level of action.
Yeah. Like
and we don't get that.
Pangborn had physically seen George and knew for a fact these were two separate people from early on, and so we didn't have to spend all of those chapters of Pangborn just hanging out at their house and drinking beers talking about what could or could not be possible.
Thad is not even half as exciting as George is, though.
Well,
That's
which
true.
is part of the story, I mean, that they're trying to tell. I understand what you're saying, and I think it would have been a really interesting book if it was more of that fast-paced, action, disturbing, all the way through.
Right.
But the fact that it's not really serves for me to set apart Thad and George. And it makes George all the more exciting. I am afraid to say how I feel about the character George Stark during this podcast and his motivations.
Terrifying.
Yeah.
Yeah, we will definitely get into George Stark as villains go, as King villains go. Really, really dark character.
Really up there with brutality. And he gets kind of more rounded as the second half of this book goes, where we're just seeing the murders in this first half. Then in the second half, he spends the time he spends talking to Liz.
Yeah.
But that there's some human conversation there.
There's a line that speaks to that. He says, "I may be a monster, but I have feelings." Does he say that out loud? There's a part of the book.
He alludes to it, yeah.
He's a monster, but he's a monster with feelings, and he feels like that's what makes monsters even scarier.
Right. I think it's really interesting, Ben, kind of back to the point you were making. Reading the first half of the book is like reading one of Thad's books. And the parts that George is in, those parts that are more exciting and interesting and are kind of a different style, that is the peak of George that we're getting through Thad. Kind of like how the fan figured it out, that he wrote these chapters in these books that were just really visceral, like a George Stark novel.
Yeah, I like that. I hadn't thought of it that way, but that makes a lot of sense. Anyway, I just wanted to talk about that and feel like maybe I'm just being too critical, trying to punch up Stephen King's work. Sorry,
like
Steve.
Yeah.
I really did enjoy the book, and let's get into the plot. Anybody want to hit us with a recap?
In part 1, we have George Stark killing everybody who was involved in his quote-unquote death, and one by one knocking them down in cool and interesting ways, and very terrifying ways. And then in the end, we still have Pangborn doesn't quite believe that any of this is possible. George has called while under surveillance, while the house is under surveillance, so he tells Thad that, "Oh, I'm crazy and I'm gone," and we all know that it's a setup. And then George reveals, "We're going to write a book together, or else I'm going to murder your whole family in terrifying ways."
You missed the most important part, Josh.
Yes.
I mean, that was good, but
Thanks.
Liz had miscarriages.
Oh, yeah. The
That's
most important piece of information.
Really important
that Liz was thrown down an escalator.
information that never comes up again. There are so many things that are set up in this book that just never happen. And
There's every
frustrating.
opportunity to put twins in this book.
Yeah.
'Cause it's just having her miscarry twins and then them eventually have twins is just like, hey guys, don't forget twins are a thing. As the very beginning of this chapter, I think, is called Wendy Takes a Fall, because Thad's not paying attention. She falls down the stairs, gets a bruise, and then William has the same bruise, because that's how twins work. Twins having twin magic.
One thing I found really fascinating as, after George calls Thad and he's telling him we're going to write this book together, and Thad is having this realization that if he does this, that'll be it. Like George is going to take over. He's going to be gone. And he says, "A sick, brilliant mind. He thought the new Thad Beaumont would be a good deal less clumsy and a good deal more dangerous." And I was so fascinated by that idea throughout, as he's trying to figure out what to do. And then eventually when they start writing together, and, Liz, we'll get to this, but bringing Liz in that and her observations of George and then of Thad.
Well, and that's right around, I think it's in that area where he says, he questions whether George was ever his, where it's that part. I was like, oh, damn. I didn't even think about that. Because he still has no idea where George came from, really. He doesn't know about the twin inside him. And so having that realization of like, maybe I didn't even create this. Maybe he was a part of me all along and I had no control over this and it's just happening.
Which leads us into him realizing that he has this connection. Once again, realizing something we have known for chapters.
Right.
But Thad is finally being active. He tries to make the sparrows fly.
And that does not turn out well.
No, one of the coolest sequences in the book, CM.
He's at his desk and he's trying to feel out that connection with George Stark. And he's, like you said, he's trying to make the sparrows fly. They kind of meet, and I can't remember the way they describe it exactly.
It's kind of like when they're on the phone, like their brain feels connected somewhere in the middle.
George, I believe, is asleep at the time, so he is totally caught off guard. And when Thad starts digging and prying, he's getting honest answers that George does not want him to have.
When he puts pencil to paper and he feels almost from his, like, just above his wrist, that he can't feel anything anymore because the hand is just
it's like
writing.
It's not his arm, it's George's.
And it's writing what we already read from Miriam's murder, because I believe that is the direct text that's in the book. And I was like, oh, that's nice and creepy. I like that a lot.
It's described in the book. Thad says he feels like he's going through Stark's subconscious hall of records where everything is neatly written down and filed away. Where have we heard that before?
Carrie.
Yep.
It's that's a recurring
We're going to hear it in Dreamcatcher.
Yep. And I just thought that was an interesting King has an idea of how the human brain works, and it's a filing cabinet.
You know what makes me really sad about this scene, though? And I want to get this in before we talk about how it ends, because I'll seem less crazy.
Good.
Because I felt sympathetic for George Stark for a minute as he's describing the connection on his end as being like a dream, that Thad was with him. He was in his bed and they were talking and whispering together like brothers. And it was like a comforting, an odd but comforting feeling at first. And I thought, why am I sympathetic to George?
Right. I should not be, this should not seem like a happy-ish kind of thing.
He just wants
it's intimate.
to live.
Yeah. And that he, when he's writing all these things before, because he's writing answers, writing questions and then writing his own answers, we're making that connection come through. And then after writing about the murder, he writes, if I don't, I'll die. Like, why do you need to write this book? If I don't, I'll die. And that blew my mind. Okay, like, this is, I mean, I get that he was hoping to be written into life, but the fact that George Stark himself, needs to write in order not to die.
Very literally.
Very literally. And I was not expecting...
And he doesn't know how to write.
Yeah.
Yeah, Thad has to teach him.
Which
That's so awesome. It's just so cool. If I would like George Stark if he hadn't senselessly murdered a bunch of innocent people.
Yeah, he's described as so charismatic.
But that's the way that he
so
was
for
written, though,
it.
to be this like you said, like this robot criminal. And as we get into it, he's described almost supernaturally the things that he's able to sense and do, and even people who are trained, like, you know, Alan Pangborn, know, okay, I can't try to take this guy down. He would stop me before I even finished forming the thought of what I would do in my head.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So this sequence of the automatic writing that Thad does, he's reaching into Stark's head, and it ends in a really kind of iconic, because it's such a King moment. He's writing and he's grasping the pencil so hard, and Stark starts fighting back. Get out of my head. There are no sparrows. And Thad grabs the pencil that he has in his hand and drives it through the webbing between his thumb and forefinger.
Oh, I cringed. I started flexing my hand when I read that.
And the way when he's cleaning it up, the connection is broken, and he's cleaning it up and like pouring peroxide in this hole in his hand that he says he looks at the other side and can see the tip of the pencil like on the surface of his skin on the other side of his hand.
It's so disgusting, but it was such a cool battle. Like it's a fight scene that no fight physically takes place.
And George did the same thing. They're both stabbed.
Yes, which leads to my favorite part, is the next chapter being the same exact sequence of events from Stark's perspective.
Yeah.
That was kick ass. I was so excited about that.
The mirrors of how they react.
Yeah, how they clean themselves up. And George Stark thinks that Thad is probably kind of being a pussy about it.
Yeah.
Which was unfair. I think he dealt with it okay.
Stark, says something along the lines of he's cleaning up his wound because Stark, to stab Thad in the hand, had to stab himself in the hand, much the way Wendy and William sustained the same bruise.
Twin magic.
Twinners.
That would really suck for them in their future. Like, what if one of them has to get their appendix removed?
Yeah.
Or has her meets someone really nice.
Yeah, becomes sexually active. It's like, what the hell was that?
What is happening? I mean, I'm not mad about it, but you should tell me before I'm going to church.
Anyway, so they both set to cleaning their wounds, And Stark is like, oh, there's no way Thad is doing this. He's kind of a pussy. He's probably calling an ambulance right now. But Thad is cleaning his own wound by pouring peroxide, and Stark is doing it by pouring Glenlivet?
Yeah.
Is that how you pronounce that?
Pouring scotch into his hand.
Pouring scotch into his hand. The same scotch that Thad goes downstairs and sees a bottle of Glenlivet and thinks about having a drink.
Oh.
But has a glass of milk instead. But I just thought the mirrors between those two chapters were so cool. Finally getting to see, okay, these two guys are twins.
Yeah. I've loved to see more chapters kind of like that.
Yeah,
seeing
that
some
would have been
events
cool.
from the same time. But in this scene, we also find out that George is literally falling apart, that his body is like decomposing and he's oozing, and that's disgusting. And that every time he goes to write, he just writes George Stark over and over again. Boxy thing, and it's the George Starks.
I'm so glad you said that, because I was going to ask you guys if you could help me. I have something highlighted. Couldn't remember the context or what it meant, and it is the George Starked over the Starky Stark. I was like, wait a minute, what?
That was him trying to write the quick brown. The quick fox,
brown fox jumps over
the lazy dog. Yeah, I
something
think
like that.
Yeah, I think that's hysterical. George Stark is very Carrie. I'm Carrie. Reminded me of that.
It kind of undermines his scariness just a little bit.
But it gives us the reason that he absolutely needs that. He can't write on his own, or else he would do it, and he could write to keep himself alive. But he has to have Thad do it, because without him, he can just write his name over and over.
Yeah. So then we move on. We skip forward a week. Stark has given Thad a week to start work on the new George Stark novel.
Much like me, he waited till the last minute.
What's it called? Steel Machine.
Steel Machine.
The Return of Alexis Machine.
Something to do with an armored car and a wedding.
Yeah.
I would read that book. Sounds great.
We actually get a few excerpts of it later on when the two start collaborating, and I wrote, Steel Machine sounds fucking bonkers. And I would read that book.
And I would read it.
Anyway, we jump forward a week, and Thad is driving to the college he works at because he knows his time is up and he needs to talk to George away from the cops. And we meet, hands down, my favorite character in the book, Professor Raleigh de Lesseps, who is 100% a Harry Potter character.
Yeah, I thought the exact same thing.
Yes, 100% that guy is a wizard.
With his pipe that has no smoke in it, but he still carries it around, and his knowledge of myth and wonder.
Yeah. Anyway, Thad drives to the college with his two cops tailing him, and we have this section where he's trying to get in contact with Stark.
Do you guys... Okay, are you familiar with The Crow?
Yeah.
No.
The movie The Crow?
With Brandon Lee?
No.
Best movie in the world, Ben. We got to pause so we can watch. It reminded me of the Crow bringing his soul back when Raleigh's explaining, when Thad is asking him what sparrows signify.
Yeah.
That they are conductors. They conduct human souls from the land of the living to the dead, or vice versa.
Yeah, the Harbingers of the Living Dead, which is a great band name.
Yeah, I'd listen to them. Heavy. Yeah, well, sparrows specifically, they're called psychopomps. And there are several kinds of birds that are psychopomps, but sparrows are specifically meant to bring the dead back to the land of the living.
Yeah, their job is to guide newly dead souls to their proper place in the afterlife, which is just a cool image, too.
But they also mention loons are also psychopomps. And jumping forward a little, there's a segment near the end of the book where there are some sparrows involved in the final showdown.
Some.
There are a couple sparrows,
sparrows.
that play an important part in the ending of the book, but as they're going into the final showdown, it mentions a single loon cries out.
I missed that.
I missed that completely.
A single loon cries out on the lake, and I immediately was like, oh, that's foreshadowing, because the sparrows are here to usher the dead to the land of the living. Well, the loon's here to take someone living to the land of the dead. Who's going? No one. Not paid off at all. Anyway, so we're at the college, and
in this college scene, I feel it's another instance where this was 50 pages that could have been 12. There was just so much like going back and forth with the cops. Like, can you give me a minute? Yeah, we can give you a minute. We probably shouldn't. But can you? Yeah, but we shouldn't. You want to get some coffee? It's over there? Yeah, we'll get some coffee. I'll be over there getting coffee.
I felt like we walked with him in real time up and down the hallways.
Yes.
I actually liked that.
You did?
I loved this chapter. The tension was ratcheting up so high at this point. We're finally getting into Thad is finally doing shit. He's finally trying to do something to take his life into his own hands by contacting George. He doesn't know what he's doing, and George has the upper hand, but he's actually, you could feel his fear that his time's up. The time's up, and I have to do something now, or it's going to be too late.
Yeah, and then George calls Raleigh's phone in order
case
to.
Thad's is tapped.
Yeah, even though I love that he points out Thad probably wouldn't think of it, but I would. And then seeing that Thad is like, why didn't you call my phone? But we know George is smarter than Thad.
Well, he's just he's a criminal. He thinks that way.
Yeah,
a little more.
And then he antagonizes him for a while, and Thad kind of opens up to Raleigh a little bit without giving him too much information. Just gives off the impression like something is going on. Mm-hmm. And Raleigh's like, if I can help, let me know. And so we have this face off, and he tells him like, your time's up, like shit's going down. And Thad goes back to his office, sits at the typewriter, and puts his hands on the home keys, and then starts typing out, what is it? Guess where I called from. Mm-hmm. And I was like, oh shit! Like throw my book down and be like, oh shit, he got you. Every movie makes, George is just a step ahead of every single thing that Thad could do. And it's just so terrifying and awesome.
Yeah. Leads to, he leaves the college and he ditches his cops for a second. He's like, I gotta make a phone call. And he plays up his bumbling professor bit to be like, oh, I forgot to make it upstairs. And he goes to a payphone and he calls his house and speaks to George. And it's like, hey, fuckwad, where's my family? And he can hear the babies crying in the background. And George is like, hey, man, calm down. He's plays it so cool and puts Liz on the phone. And Liz sets up the Chekov's gun for the ending by saying, remember Aunt Martha?
Yeah.
Remember Aunt Martha?
Oh, I was so mad about that too.
And there's a big hubbub that Stark thinks, hey, what that was code for something. And Thad says, no, she's just tried to tell me that you guys are going to the lake house in Castle Rock. Aunt Martha, we used to joke that we'd hide from Aunt Martha at the lake house. Haha, it's just, don't worry about it. And Stark's like, okay, fine. But Thad knows that it was actually because Aunt Martha used to shoot rats with a gun. Liz was telling him to get the gun out of the shed and shoot George Stark. You want to guess if it happens, listeners?
It doesn't happen.
I was so bored by that passage that it's no wonder he forgot to do that, because I forgot that happened.
This book has no regards to Chekhov's gun. If there's a gun on stage in the first act, it has to go off by the third.
Right.
Fuck that in this book.
We're throwing all the red herrings out.
Yeah.
You just try to pick out what's actually going to happen, because you're never going to figure it out.
The sparrows are the only important part, and everything else is like
everything else is garbage. But then we get another switch back to George, where we find all the things that George was doing while we were reading this in real time walk down the hall before the phone call with that. The attack scene on those police officers out front, I was legitimately terrified reading it because of how gruesome it is. And I highlighted another one of the passages because Ben brought up the eye imagery and that he slices the cop's eye, popping it open. So.
Is Stephen King a little unfair to cops? Because the way he describes them, they die so easily, and it's like their training never kicks in. It's not like he's so good that he gets in there before their training kicks in. They are just frozen by him.
To be fair, the way he is described, I would freeze up too. I would shit my pants.
Yeah, but they're trained not to shit their pants.
Especially because literally he uses the exact same trick that he used on the cops for the photographer.
But he also, we've established that he's so quiet. He closes the gap in on those guys way faster. That like he's already within arm's reach by the time they notice him.
He really Voorheeses them.
Yeah. he's just there and kills the one, and then he slashes the other guy's scrotum open.
And oh Jesus!
And then slashes his palms, and then cuts his throat. And I was like, this is just terrifying.
The way he's described as looking during this, it's the first time he's described. They had mentioned he's falling apart, that he's beginning to rot. As he approaches these cops, he removes the bandages that he has put on his face, and the King really has a way with gore. He is described as having sticky, unthinkable fluid ran down hillocks of proud flesh. Now, I don't know if you guys knew what that means, but listeners, do not Google image search the phrase proud flesh.
Oh, noted.
Don't do that. Like I did.
Oh, I don't even want to know.
So I had a very specific image in my mind of George going throughout the rest of this book.
Now, this is, we touched on this a little bit earlier, but this was the point in my notes that I actually wrote down. If we changed the means and the just kind of transplant the situation that George is in, this story could be told with George as the hero. Mm-hmm. If he was not murdering tons of people, if this was a story about a fictional character who was brought to life and then needed his creator to keep him alive, and his creator was
trying
refusing.
To kill him. Mm-hmm.
And if Thad had been portrayed in the way I guess we're supposed to feel by the end of the book about him. There's a part in the final chapter, I think, after all this has happened, after Stark and Thad go up to Thad's study to begin writing Steel Machine, Liz tells Alan, part of Thad is crazy. Part of him has always been crazy. We never see that. It's never alluded to.
It is alluded to, though.
How?
In the first part, when they're talking about how this whole thing came about, why he had to kill George Stark in the first place, and alluding to his alcoholism and issues that they'd had, and her not liking George, not liking Thad when he was writing as George. She kind of hinted that there were some problems during that time.
Alcoholism, and maybe he was kind of a dick, but she also specifically says, like, he was never abusive. He was just kind of shitty.
Be abusive, though, to be intimidating or wrong in some way.
That's true.
And think about how intuitive she is.
I did write my next note just says Liz is a badass.
She is. Again,
and is never given her badass moment. So mad about it.
They set it up like she's gonna have one. Like when she hides the scissors.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Chekov's scissors. Chekov's knife under the couch. Never come to anything.
Well, I do like what happens with the scissors, thoh.
Yeah,
that was a cool point.
Yeah, she sneaks some scissors. Well, let's back up. Sorry. Because George arrives, and I really think the setup of him coming into her home and her reaction to him is really cool.
That she immediately bolts for the kitchen for a knife.
Yeah.
That was the point where I was like, fuck yeah, Liz, kill this motherfucker.
I guess I was talking more about the slight attraction and revulsion sort of mixed together.
Oh, yeah. That.
Yeah, and when he sees how he talks to her and how he handles the kids.
Yeah.
And it's almost humanizing for this monster. She sees what part of Thad exists in George, and she can't help but like feel that
Respond
way.
to that.
Yeah,
When
the
he's
way-
holding Wendy.
Yes.
And she responds to him and gives him a Wendy wave and is like touching
Chilling.
his face. And Liz in her head thinks the frightening thing is he's trying to be gentle and he can't be, but he thinks he's being gentle.
Yeah. That whole segment, everything with Stark and the babies loving Stark because he is part of their Thad, gave me goosebumps. And that phrase in particular.
It's the first time you see that how much this connection goes both ways, because we know that Thad has that admiration for George in that creepy way of like, George is the man I'll never be,
Right.
because I'm clumsy and can't talk to people well and blah blah blah. But George, on the other hand, might want to be gentle, but he actually just can't do it. So then we know that they're going to go to Castle Rock, which we also skipped over this, well, because I jumped ahead. But that they have the in the writing, he talks about where it all started, like about going home, and home is Castle Rock, because that is where Thad started writing the first George Stark novel. So we know, okay, the showdown is coming to Castle Rock. Fuck yeah, the evil, malevolent power of Castle Rock. It's all Castle Rock's fault that this is even happening. And Thad ditches the car and fucks up his own car in a junkyard, which I thought was super cool to like disguise it. Like, way to commit, buddy.
I
Beat the
wouldn't have
shit
been
out of
able
your
to do
car.
that. I would have been like, oh man, the insurance later.
That sequence of him evading the cops and how he manages it by telling himself, just, this is happening in one of your books.
Yeah.
And I feel like that plays into he starts tapping into Stark. And because the sequence is a very Stark novel more than a Thad novel, you know, where he pulls out into traffic just at the right second to evade the cops. It's a very cool sequence.
It makes sense too, because if through writing this last book, Stark can take over Thad, would not Thad sort of reabsorb some of Stark into himself if, Stark dies?
Yeah, I would assume so, because they are that bond goes both ways, so they're kind of both leaking into each. Oh, that's a terrible turn of phrase.
I'd imagine it would be a more overt thing than it was previously too.
Yeah.
Well, and from this point on, Thad is so decisive and he's so direct. There's no more of this wondering what to do. He's got a plan of action, mostly because George has left him no other option but to do so.
The sparrows give him some courage too, knowing that he has power. Like, that's coming from him.
I found that weird because the sparrows, he doesn't know what they mean. He keeps seeing them. They keep showing up in greater and greater number. And he keeps saying they're my only chance, but he's terrified of them. So I don't.
But he should be, though, because he has that warning from Professor Raleigh.
No man controls the agents of the afterlife, not for long, and there's always a price.
There's always a price.
Which I could not help reading the second half of this book, and maybe this is why I liked the second half as well, because of the information that CM dropped on us last time about Thad's tragic future.
Yeah.
That goes on after the book. I read the second half of this book with that knowledge, and there were so many excerpts that knowing what happens to him becomes so much more poignant and tragic. Going back to when Thad had first got to his office at the college, he walks in and there's a part that says, for no reason that he could place, He felt a sudden and nearly sickening wave of homesickness and emptiness and loss. And I just felt so terrible for Thad, knowing what his life turns out to be.
Yeah.
That was like, he doesn't know it at the time, but his life is never going to be the same after this.
Yeah.
He's never going to get that feeling back. The part that really stuck out to me, this is jumping way ahead, at the end, and Thad says to Alan Pangborn, I feel like you liked me at some point, and that's changed, and I'm not sure why. Did I do something? And he doesn't get it. And Alan describes it, he doesn't say this out loud to him. He's just like, I don't give a fuck. That's what he actually says. But he says that Thad doesn't understand, and he doesn't think he ever will, although Liz does. He describes it as standing next to Thad is like standing next to a cave some nightmarish creature came out of, and the monster's gone, but you still don't want to be close to that cave where it came from because there might be another one. You never know.
Yeah.
And so that's the feeling that he has about him now, which is sad considering how they bonded.
I
earlier.
definitely,
Very ominous.
Yeah, have some feelings about that, which I want to bring up at the end of the episode. Okay. My big final question to you guys.
Perfect.
We'll go back to Thad has evaded his police escort, and he's at this junkyard, and he calls Raleigh and says, hey, man, I'm in trouble. I need a favor. And Raleigh comes in his shitty old VW bug, because of course he does.
Yeah.
And gives Thad a bird whistle, the MacGuffin of the book, and says, be careful, and gives him that warning about the sparrows.
To which Thad immediately throws that, like, fuck a price, birds, take me to Stark.
Yeah.
He just commands the birds, and they do it.
Yeah,
they get him back later.
Yeah.
When he turns around and Rowley sees the 20,000 sparrows sitting in the junkyard.
That was cool. I liked that character a lot when he showed up. It was like, yeah.
Yeah, he's definitely somewhere in a background of a Harry Potter movie. That guy's just chilling out. We go on to, we finally get back to Pangborn, who we haven't heard from in a while.
Still not doing a lot.
But he finally gets his call from Dr. Pritchard, the surgeon who operated on Thad as a kid.
We spend about 12 pages getting the information that we all got in chapter
know.
1.
I was just going to ask, do you guys think for the reader, would it have been better to find that out then and not at the very beginning? I don't know.
Yes. Well, for structure-wise, yes, definitely. Because, like I said, we spend half the chapter rehashing stuff that we've already
and
read.
I guess it would have left more of
a scene.
Question who George actually was if we didn't have that tumor scene.
But it is nice. We get all the facts in that first scene of what happened with that tumor. And now hearing Pritchard tell it in his own words, and that it was so distinct, he still remembers it clear as day. Like he remembered that surgery. He'd followed Thad's career and showing
and had known Thad was the same kid because the picture in the book jacket, he had the same exact eyes.
Eyes.
Have eyes underlined in my notes like 30 goddamn times. But he does drop some information that we did not know, and that is the day after his surgery, as Thad was recovering, the hospital was attacked by a small flock of sparrows.
That was pretty badass.
Yeah.
And it's cool that Alan keeps that information to himself. So George, like, he picks up on the fact that George does not know about the sparrows when they finally
that they're all landing everywhere, and it's like, George, does George not see these?
Can we talk about Alan making his way unsuccessfully, ultimately, up to the house?
Yes. My favorite part is he goes out and decides to go it alone. And he, on a whim or a hunch, he stops at a roadside like gas station or whatever and talks to 3 old ladies and asks about a Volvo that's parked in the parking lot. And the ladies look nervously at him. They're like, did we do something wrong? And he responds, no, ma'am, just like Volvos. And then that's followed by, that sounded just Cracker Jack. And I laughed so hard that instantly made Alan Pangborn so much more likable to me. I already liked Pangborn.
It was very endearing.
It was that's such a human bit of reaction, of a human bit of writing, because I can't count the number of times that I've had that same reaction where I say something and I'm like, well, fucking good job, dingus. Way to make the words happen.
Now I've got to commit to having said that. All right.
But yeah, then he heads to the house.
Yeah, he parks away from the house to try to get the drop on George. And as he's driving down this lane, this lake house area, and he starts to see all these sparrows just covering the property nearby Thad's house. And so he stops the car and he gets out and he's stealthily making his way towards the house. And all of a sudden there's like a gun pressed up to him. And it's George Stark.
I freaked out. I freaked out. But it was just like, Pangborn is like, all right, I'm going to park here because there's no way he could hear me park out here, and I'll take this long path up, stay like hidden. Like, he's got this plan that should work to at least, I assumed he would at least get to the house and maybe get caught then. But the fact that like he sees the house and then that gun is just right there and he just did not hear a single sound. And then Pangborn does something that I was like, I actually wrote down, oh no, because he slides a Tonto impression in there. He was creeping up the Beaumont driveway, meaning to sneak across the road like Tonto, take him good look around, get him idea how things are, Kimosabi.
I didn't like that.
Yeah, that's...
I wrote, why? Why is this the moment to bust out your sweet Tonto dialogue?
It was really cool though, because then we got to see how George found him. He heard the car. It was unnatural how far away he heard the car.
I think we got those backwards, actually.
We did. Alan Parks goes to walk, then we go to George,
Oh,
and because
okay.
George is talking to Liz about the book, and Liz actually likes the book, which I bet has got to be a weird feeling. This guy who has kidnapped you and is holding your family hostage. It's like if you ever get stuck at a party with somebody who's like writing their book or writing a play, and they're like, let me tell you about the story that I've got going on, like, and there's, you can't escape that conversation.
Yep.
But now imagine it is somebody with a gun to you and your children, and they're falling apart.
Is that us every time we talk about our podcast?
Yeah, that's how other people perceive us when we're talking about the show. But she, like, I can't imagine how weird that must be to think, like, oh yeah, I could see it.
Yeah.
You guys should get cracking. Oh wait, no, don't.
Yeah, and this is the part he's ranting about his book. Liz goes to the bathroom and she's hiding the scissors. She's gonna use them and do something badass because Liz is super cool. And then Stark hears Pangborn's car and he's like, shit, car coming, it's the cops. Ties her up, and before he leaves, reaches down the front of her skirt and pulls the scissors out. And she's like, you knew? And he's like, I fucking knew from the start. Like,
Yeah.
idiot.
It's just an extra layer of creepy of like, that was the moment where I was like, oh, George is unstoppable. He notices every little detail. There is nothing anybody can do but comply with what George wants them to do. You can't handle him with physical means. The only thing that is going to affect this guy is something supernatural, because he just sees everything coming. He notices every detail. And that's what makes him such a terrifying villain.
Oh, we totally skipped how Alan figuring out the car thing with the guy with the garage and the
with
summer cars.
Fuzzy Martin.
At the same time that he got the phone call from the surgeon, he almost immediately gets a phone call from this guy saying,
A black tornado just drove out of my barn, which is weird because I didn't have a black tornado in my barn.
But it's cool because it sort of set up how not only did George sort of come into being through Thad's story writing and whatever else this crazy tumor thing was, but everything that he is associated with and everything he needs also shows up, although it shows up in the place where it belongs and not where is necessarily convenient for George to get to.
Right.
Yeah.
I do love, though, that he's like, given all this detail, like, there could have been other people in the car. It has a Mississippi license plate. Like, did you see if it had a bumper sticker? Oh, yeah, I saw if it had a bumper sticker. It said high-toned son of a bitch on it. And Pangborn's like, all right, I'm in now, I guess.
Yeah,
it's really the high-toned son of a bitch that sold me.
That kind of helps explain, I think, why he was so willing to go this solo.
Yeah, he's finally realized that everything I've been trying to fight against, there's got to be at least something true that I'm not seeing, because the evidence is all just piled up here.
If this guy can do this, then the normal cops have no chance.
Right.
Yeah, I believe he says sending a wave of straight state troopers would be like sending men into a meat grinder.
Yeah.
So he goes in alone.
Which I would love to read that chapter. Right.
Anyway, we don't see that.
No, we don't. And what we do see is Thad finally arrive where Pangborn parked his car, and there are millions of sparrows. He can't even see Pangborn's car under all the sparrows. He drove past a field and can't see any field because it's full of sparrows.
And they're moving out of the way of his wheels.
I loved this segment because it is so Lovecraftian. For being something so mundane, that King can take something like a sparrow, a bird most of us probably see every day, but just the idea of there being possibly billions of sparrows covering literally every surface that you can see becomes this mind-rending terror.
And George is still not seeing them.
Yeah. But I did, and then my first note immediately after that was, holy shit, everybody's together. And this was the point where I was up until 2 a.m. because I wasn't going to stop.
There's only like 30 pages left. I can do this in 10 minutes.
Exactly.
Yeah, Thad and George meeting for the first time.
I loved seeing it through the eyes of Liz. I thought that was a really nice touch, because it's, again, sort of that intuition of hers and that horror and fascination that, wow, they stand the same, they smile the same, they have the same gestures. She can see Thad and George and Thad.
There's a part where she says she looks back and forth. I believe it's when they go into the living room and Thad is like, hey, listen, guys, we're writing the book.
And he totally rats her out.
Yeah. Totally denies Liz her second badass moment. She had hid a knife under the couch. And I was so excited because after the scissors, you're like, Liz has to do something awesome. All of these characters are here. They're all going to have to play a part in taking this guy down. Nope.
Because they lock themselves up in this study with, interestingly, no windows, like nothing. It's like behind this secret shelf. You have to...
Who doesn't want a secret study, though?
It sounds pretty damn cool.
Usually, like rolling that bookcase, and then there's this tiny room.
So they go into the study and they're getting ready to write. And Thad turns to Liz and says, go on. Get out now. And as the segment says, George Stark's eyes looked out of Thad Beaumont's face.
Fucking creepy.
Yeah.
It makes that ending so much more intense because we've been so focused on what's opposite about them for almost the entire book. We have little glimpses of their similarities as we go, but the fact that once they're together, they're almost so in sync with one another that you have all those moments of seeing them stand the same way, laugh with the same madness, and see those looks, because now you are having them side by side. They're almost one person. And all of that gets just so much more intense.
I love that. So we reach the final showdown. Stark and Thad enter the study, and they have little writing stations set up side by side, and they begin to write Steel Machine, the craziest sounding book that has ever been written, because Alexis Machine is hiding inside of a cake with a machine gun.
Like you do.
My favorite part about that was, so Thad starts writing first, and then he's like, all right, man, here you go, do it. And he seems so supportive, strangely.
Yeah, he really is.
And George takes over, and he's really into it, and he's starting to heal. His sores are starting to disappear. His skin is getting pink and less oozy. and Thad is starting to get sores. And so we're kind of worried, like, oh no, this is bad. What's happening? But then he hands Thad what he's written, and every third word is sparrows. He has no idea.
And outside, we see from Alan and Liz the sparrows gathering.
Then Thad takes his moment, takes that 1 second that he's so wrapped up, blows that bird whistle, and then all hell breaks loose. Just sparrows shattering through windows, up the stairs, and slamming against the bookshelf over and over and over.
It is such an amazing friggin' segment of these millions of birds filling the entire house, crashing through the kitchen, destroying things. They knock over a bureau, and Alan is like, how many fucking sparrows does it take to knock over an entire... And he's like, I don't want to think about it.
Yeah, and then he pulls the couch over him and Liz because they almost can't breathe because every feasible space is filled with sparrows.
The air is birds.
And then not only do they eventually crash through the secret door, and then they latch on and they just start pecking.
That is gruesome.
That is terrifying. They're just latched on, like pecking like George is, grabbing them and crushing a couple, and every time he opens up a space on his body, it's immediately filled with sparrows.
Yeah, they're just too many. Yeah. And they're trying to take him away. I don't know why this freaked me out so much, but when Alan and Liz finally make it up the steps under this Afghan to protect them from the birds, and they're crunching over dead bird bodies, and it's just really visceral and gross.
It made me want to vomit.
It was really gross. But he's watching the birds. They've pecked through George Stark, and they're trying to lift him. And they're all like dive bombing and killing themselves. And he remembered that sparrows can't hover. I was like, oh,
they just have to fly straight forward to their doom.
They're on a mission.
And not only do they break the inside of the house, but they break the exterior wall of the house.
Kool-Aid Man into the house.
Oh, yeah.
And then we have there's the giant hole in the wall, and the birds have finally pecked enough George Stark away that they can lift and carry him through the hole, and they watch as he goes off into the distance till he's just a dot and gone.
He disappears into, like, they describe the sky. It reminded me of like a kind of a portal. The sky, there's this darker portion, and he kind of disappears into that with the sparrows.
Yeah, I couldn't tell if that was a literal, because they say the sky is dark, but in the midst of it is this blacker void in the shape of a man.
I thought it was, I took it as literal.
I thought it could have been either way, where it was literally them carrying him back to Ennsville, or just that they fly away. It's dark, and just the darker shade, the void of a man is just what Stark is. And then we head into the epilogue where Pangborn's like, suck my dick. And then they burn down the house. And that's the end.
I thought that was a really bold move at the end for Pangborn to be like, this is just too much to explain. And just burns that motherfucker down.
Okay, fair. It's a lot to process, but this is my big final question I wanted to ask you guys. Is Alan essentially says, hey, man, this is your fault. You brought Stark into existence. And throughout the whole book, Thad has talked about how guilty he feels. That he feels this guilt for bringing this upon the world. Bullshit! I wanted to ask you guys how you felt about that, because in my opinion, it was not a conscious decision. He was never shown to be a bad guy. He was just a guy. Everything that happens to him is just he's a victim of circumstance.
I'm going to take the complete opposite stance.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, only because you are absolutely correct. And
that doesn't sound like the opposite.
I know, but no, you are, because who would ever write a book under a pseudonym and then expect any part of them expect that pseudonym would come to life and start murdering people? Nobody. Right. That's so unreasonable. But the part that makes me respond to him feeling guilty, the thing I understand about that is all of the little hints that we're getting, you know, like we talked about earlier with Liz and then Alan at the end. And George is part of Thad. And Thad likes that part.
Oh, okay, I guess my problem is how literally we are supposed to take this whole book. This book is not exactly full of metaphor. It's nope, a guy comes to life and kills a bunch of people.
Right.
But there's so much that, like, okay, are we supposed to take Stark as a metaphor for these feelings that Thad has? I had a few times written in my notes, Thad wants Stark to live. Could it be because he doesn't like his life with his family? Could it be because he wants to be like Stark, where he's free and has this dark life? Is Stark a manifestation of his suicidal tendencies because he created this character that just wants to kill him? And we know that while he was drinking, while he had his writer's block, that he was suicidal. He took a bunch of pills. There's all of these things. It's like, okay, Stark could be seen as all of these things, but that's not what book this is. This is a Stephen King book where a pseudonym comes to life and kills a bunch of people.
See, I feel like King was walking a very fine line in between those two ideas, trying to weave those together. I guess, in a nutshell, I agree with Alan. Like, the way Alan feels about him at the end of the book, that's how I feel about Thad. I agree. Is it fair? No.
Interesting. Okay.
There's so much that we don't know about why this happened.
Right.
So it is safe to say that, yes, we all agree it's unreasonable for you to be prepared for your pen name to come to life and start murdering people. We're not saying that, but it is, at a certain point, you have to question the power that brought this monster to life.
Okay.
And not knowing, and even Thad doesn't know if that power is within him, which is why I agree with Pangborn on you don't know if another monster will come out of that, because who's to say that that power doesn't still exist in Thad, that he could go through another spout of darkness and create another creature, maybe not a George Stark.
Because he's irresponsible with that power.
Guys. Oh, my brain just did it. Because we know that the darkness does still exist in him, because we know his future. His wife leaves him. So,
and he
says that as soon as he's done with his business writing this book, and if he survives Stark, the first thing he's going to do is have a drink.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah.
So the darkness that was Stark still exists in him, and he goes on to... Maybe he did absorb some of Stark back into himself and becomes just the dark hole.
I think Alan feels the way he does because, you know, when Liz has that line, part of him is crazy. I think Alan, it's not out of the realm of possibility for him that Thad would intentionally open that up again, bring back that monster or a different monster.
I'm thinking now of the monsters, like, in a metaphorical sense, that, like, now he defeated the literal physical monster, but he still has these monsters that he'll deal with in the future.
Yeah, all the demons inside him. And he, you know, we talked about earlier that bill comes due, and it comes due heavy on his life. He takes his own life. So you can't imagine...
But then it's kind of shitty because that's just mental illness. He has PTSD... And he needs his friends now. It just sucks, guys.
The closest thing he has to a best friend, just burn down his house. What a dick.
Oh, man. He'll have to go hang. I hope he hung out with Rowley a lot. Anyway, so that is the dark half, guys. Let's go around real quick and give our ratings. I feel like I've been maybe not overly. I didn't realize how different reading books for fun versus reading them with a critical eye would be. And I tend to have a critical eye when I'm reading things to like dissect them. And I felt this book, under the slightest bit of analysis, kind of falls apart. I liked it if you take it for what it is, just a guy chasing after his murder brother, ghost. It's very enjoyable, but if you, I just felt like the messages underlying the book, I would have liked a little more exploration of what it all meant. So I'm going to go ahead and give it a solid 3 out of 5 chambray shirts.
Because of the conversation that we just had about metaphor versus reality, and, you know, I really do feel like those are sort of interwoven throughout the book. Big surprise. I got to give it 5 blue chambray shirts. I told you. It's never not going to be. No, it's so much fun. I mean, there are some problem areas, and I'm sure if Stephen King went back and revised it, he would change some things, and we would probably be a little happier with the story. But that didn't take away from my enjoyment of it.
No, I do have to say, on my scale of 1 to 5, 3 is a solid, I really liked this book. 4 is, I love this book. And 5 is, this book is perfect.
Hey, you don't have to justify your stars.
I'm on the same wavelength as you, my
I just
friend.
want people not to be like, Ben's always giving them like, he hasn't rated anything 5 stars.
No, they're going to be like, CM does not read anything critically.
At least you were upfront about it in the first episode that you were going to give them all 5s. As for me, I would put it at a 4 blue chambray shirts. I really loved the sections that I loved, and I still enjoyed the scenes that I was kind of drudging through of like, okay, we get it. Nothing's really happening, especially looking at it critically after I read it and then go back through for my notes, realizing that, we spent 2 chapters where literally nothing happened. Those moments, I still enjoyed them at the time of reading them. So,
yeah.
All right, well, that's it for this episode of Derry Public Radio. As always, thank you so much for listening. Please join us for our next episode, which will be us watching the movie The Dark Half. So for Benjamin Graham and CM Alexander, I'm Joshua Kahn, reminding you that writers invite ghosts. Maybe, along with actors and artists, they're the only totally accepted mediums of our society. They make worlds that never were, populate them with people who never existed, and then invite us to join them in their fantasies. And we do it. Oh yes, we pay to do it.
Hey everyone, CM Alexander here. Once again, a big thanks to our sponsor, Constant Readers. If you haven't heard of Constant Readers, it's the most comprehensive Stephen King fan site on the internet. They read and watch every Stephen King-related book, movie, TV show, and comic, and then write all about it. Check out what they've done so far on their website at constantreaders.org, or find them on Instagram and Twitter at ConstantRead12. That's ConstantReade12. Thanks again for listening to The Dark Half Part 2. Join us next week for the movie. It's a lot of fun, and it's directed by George Romero. How much better can it get? Romero and King. As always, you can find us on Facebook or Instagram at Derry Public Radio or Twitter at Derry Public. We may use your comments or give you a shout out on an upcoming episode. Send us any questions or comments or photos of your cats at derrypublicradio@gmail.com. And like and subscribe to us on all the places you listen to podcasts. That's it for now. Goodbye, listeners.